Exhibition's titled Freshwater, and I think one of the things that is really important is that we are in central Victoria. Our water sources, we're surrounded by, the Goulburn River, the Broken Rivers, is freshwater, and that is a very unique set of constraints, contradictions, challenges, opportunities that it then makes you think about. The exhibition has been developed around four main themes: environmental, so how we think about environment in relation to these themes and ideas of freshwater; economic, we're surrounded by a very rich agricultural country, that's often quite water intensive, so from dairy to the fruit growing in this district. Water rights is an issue that you can never get away from in the country. So environmental, economic, agricultural, cultural, we're surrounded by a country that has really significant cultural connections and associations for different people from the local Indigenous communities. Even the uses of water for multicultural communities in the washing of hands or the traditions around religious processes and beliefs. So water plays a part in all of that, and it is fresh water. And of course the political aspect of water, as I said, if you think quite closely to us, Victoria and New South Wales are divided by a river. It's a freshwater river. It's an arbitrary geographic marking on a map, and yet it's been enormously significant for Indigenous peoples moving, the Cammergunja moving across from New South Wales to Victoria, walking their way to Shepparton and eventually settling in the flats, which again is a floodplain. So when you think about Shepparton and you think about our context, you can't help but think that this is a show and an exhibition of our place, of our location, of our identity, and of our times. So the first room that you get to when you come upstairs and have a look at the exhibition is a salon hang. The opportunity around this exhibition is to include historic works, works from the collection that perhaps haven't been seen either ever or for a very, very long time, to borrow works that enabled us to rethink those stories that we were telling, to showcase ceramics alongside painting, to say that there is really no division between materiality and that these are all media that artists select to explore and to tell their stories, so using the medium that is best suited to their narrative. And then of course there were certain gaps in that, and I went to dear friends, colleagues, collectors, patrons, people that I've worked with before, and literally said to them, now, have you got an X? Because I really need one in this hang. So that's how the salon hang developed. A salon hang, of course, is a quite closely hung, densely put together narrative. It comes from a sort of 19th century and earlier tradition of hanging floor to ceiling, and very much that European tradition of hanging. What I didn't want to happen was that you had works from sort of first European settlement on one side and one history of Australia, and Indigenous works on the other, because that could be really a position, I think it would have very bad karma. So the first work that introduces this salon hang is Albert Namatjira. It's a water hole. It looks, for all intensive purposes, like a beautifully rendered watercolour in a Western tradition. It is one of our leading Australian Aboriginal artists. And then, of course, you go into Eugene von Gerard, two major works of Shepparton from his book of almost picture postcard images around Australia. Leading Australian artist, who really was one of the first artists to be able to depict the Australian bush and landscape using a non-European lens to capture those eucalypts and the bush and the trees and these particular places. So we have Maguire's Punt, that was, the crossing across Shepparton, which was the first name for Shepparton itself. The third work that we've got in this hang is Shepparton in the UK. So of course we acknowledge Shepparton and the origins and the history of these people coming to Australia to settle and to develop a new way of life, after we've talked about the First Peoples and after we've thought about how we want to represent ourselves in this burgeoning, growing and innovative place in Australia. So when you look at the salon hang, you'll see that there are no labels. And there was a very specific reason for that. We've painted the walls a sort of grey colour. It's actually called donkey. And it's actually one of the colours that's very good for revealing works of this sort of nature. In salon hangs traditionally, they were always painted a variety of colours, from a rich sort of vermilion red to greys to greens, and this was there was a belief that this would show off and make these works sing in a particular way. We haven't included labels for a very specific reason. We're inviting people to look at the works primarily. If you were to put labels on every single work, I guarantee that everyone would come in and look at the work and read the label before they looked at the work. It also helps us to break down those assumptions about who a work is by and whether a work is Indigenous or not Indigenous. So again, there's that lovely conversation being set up around the ideas that are included in the exhibition and the material that the artists are working with to best explore their themes and ideas. We do have a lot of information available, so you're encouraged to come, get your room brochure and walk around the room and do a bit of a sort of spot check. See if you can test your art history or test your visual analysis and work out who you think it might be and where they come from. So in this salon hang you have a range of various themes. You've obviously got the early history of Shepparton, and then we rapidly move into what I call a sort of watery, verdant, ferny, wetlandsy sort of feel of dripping waterways. Anyone that's going up to the sort of rainforests, and even the forests around the dandenongs and so on, there's this lovely ferny feel of verdant green and moss. And that really is another part. We don't see it much in Shepparton, but that is another part of freshwater, of course. One of the works that we've got in this show is another work we've borrowed. It's by Lynn Onis. He is a Yorta Yorta artist. He's probably one of the most significant Yorta Yorta artists of our times. Beautiful little tree frogs surrounded by ferns, and that meticulous detail, I think, is something that people are really attracted to. Alongside that is a work by Bouvelot in the collection. Hasn't been shown for many, many years, and two beautiful little works on paper that illustrate that are studies. So you can see the study that then is the precursor to the watercolour work. We also have a work that is in the collection by Brent Harris, another leading contemporary Australian artist. It's a work on paper and it's called Swamp. And it's a sort of abject, amorphous figure leaning. You don't know if this is hair or it's sort of, some sort of viscous, So that sort of, again, that drippy effect of water and overly water is something that is captured in another way. Our beautiful long-legged turtles, I think they might be tortoises, but I'm not sure if they're turtles or tortoises, but Thanakupi, so significant for this place. She was from Cairns, of course, Indigenous artist. And this is very much the cultural icon, if you want, of this place. So that's a sort of lovely connection of fresh water and the sort of excesses of water and that lovely drippy, magical feel that you have. We've also, of course, got the effects of not enough water and drought. Those beautiful skeletal scapes that are wonderful in their harshness. And then the way that a number of Indigenous artists map country using an aerial perspective, looking down at the waterways, the dry waterways, and the patterning that is created, and the way that that's another way of mapping stories. So one of the works that, when you're curating a show and thinking about how to pull together such a large theme, there are often a couple of works that become sort of touchstones, or works that often things circulate around. And for me, this was one of the works in this exhibition. It's a work by Andrew Hazewinkle, and it's a series of photographs, some from found material and some that he has taken. He had a residency at the British School in Rome, so these ideas, the idea of residencies and going and spending time and working with archives is one that is incredibly valuable, both for curators and artists. It gives you time to reflect and think about where you are in the world, and these sorts of universal themes and ideas, I think, that often come out in a contemporary context. So he looked at a number of very key archives that are managed and cared for by the British School in Rome, and discovered these black and white photographs here of floods in Florence and also in Rome. What many people won't realise is that, water is a powerful force and can, as we have just recently seen through natural disasters in Australia, cause incredible damage and also incredible moments of excess and growth. So you've got that sort of polarity, I think, happening. These capture images of famous icons, if you want, in Italian cities under flood. So, of course, this is the Pantheon in Rome that most people would never have seen, with water halfway up the columns. That is such a familiar image. Equally, this could be somewhere in Shepparton, almost, in the streets, in the surrounding landscape of Shepparton, inundated with floods. Triumphant arch, whether it's Florence, whether it's Rome. If I knew my art history better, I would probably be able to tell. But they're very universal figures, I think, of this experience overseas, but that has connections with us. He's paired this with a series of photographs that he took when he was in Rome. He spent a lot of time walking along the Tiber, and he was very interested in these temporary shelters that people create to create a sense of home, a sense of habitation, and a sense of place from flotsam and jetsam and things that other people have discarded. So you can see this was just washed down the river, and it's, it becomes a home for someone, it becomes a shelter for someone. Here in this work, you can see that they've just put plastic bags and sort of set out their possessions as if it's, what you would do in your own home. But this is a public space, it's a public domain that has become part privatised. When I first came to Shepparton and I used to walk along the Goulburn River at various times of the year, I was very struck by the temporary shelters and homes that people created, sometimes from fruit pickers coming here, so itinerant workers that come, that spend some time, that are looking for somewhere to set up camp, set up home, and of course some of our other homeless people living and working or living in Shepparton. So there was a real resonance with this work and our own Shepparton context. So another one of the works that, as I said, you have a number of key works that often exhibitions develop around or rotate around, and you keep them in your mind, and they're works that you refer back to as sort of points of contact. And I have known the work of John Wolseley for many, many years. He's a marvellous advocate for exploring the environment, for reflecting themes and ideas that are often very subtle. So whether it's the waders or the birds or the bird life, and then the levels of life below the bird life that support the birds in wetlands such as this Warrnambool site. They're the sorts of things that he captures through sustained field work, if you want, spending time living in the field and drawing and gathering material. And often on his works on paper, you'll see they're very crushed and they're crumpled and they're blown away, and he's gone and captured them and he's got charcoal on them, and so they're living, working documents. This, of course, is a tapestry, which means that it requires other people to collaborate with. And it was made at the Australian Tapestry Workshop in Melbourne in their studio, which is the most marvellous place to go and visit and have a look at. And the first thing that they do is work with the artist to develop a palette. So you go in and they've got these wonderful spools of different coloured threads, and they work together to get a palette for the colours that are going to reflect that watery or the subject matter of the material. John Wolseley works in watercolour, so the challenge is how do you translate watercolour, a medium that is very delicate and sort of floaty, into a two-dimensional work that is made of wool. So this is wool, Australian-made wool, that's all dyed on site. And yet I think you can see that in these certain parts, they've beautifully captured the sort of spills of colour and the water as it spills across the page. The grasses, the way that the grasses just gently float in the breeze. And it's got that lightness to the subject matter that I think he captures so well. One of the things that we have done is asked to borrow all of the samples that the artist and the weavers develop in advance of doing this very large work. And I should add that this work normally hangs in a hospital. It's a work that was gifted to the people of Hamilton. And we had to beg, borrow and be very creative in convincing them to give up this work to show in Shepparton in the context of this exhibition for a 2-month period. So these little samples enable us to reveal the process of making an exhibition, of making a work of this sort, and the collaborative explorations that go into that, the ways of trying things and then trying to get them right. So you'll see there's a little detail that focuses on this section, and actually I think I like the sample. Well, I don't know, both of them are different, but you can see these birds doing a bit of a dance, and you know those curlews, they do this thing with their feet, and that's one of the things you can see trialling. You've got a beautiful colour swatch that reminds me of Sonia Delaunay and her colour work in the early modernist turn of the century. And that's all of these dark colours to the light blues to this colour palette, trialled out to see that it all works together. So we've replicated the position of the samples in where they would be found in the bigger tapestry. So you get a sense of them building up these different parts to create the whole. Yep. So different exhibitions have different sorts of feels, and this exhibition is, in a way, a cooler exhibition, an exhibition that, it's often quite seductively alluring in terms of being sort of falling into the images. It could be, it's not a very large, voluminous exhibition in the middle of the gallery spaces. It's very important that you do have sculptural elements so that people move around space, and actually, almost like colour, it moves in. If you think about the Renaissance pictures, colour moves your eye around the picture plane. Well, an exhibition needs to do the same thing. So thinking about how you create an experience for viewers in developing an exhibition is really quite central. So I knew of these works that were made by Janet Birchall and Jennifer McCamley, and I thought that they introduced a quite fun, slightly irreverent, but actually really interesting component to the exhibition that was quite cerebral and quite cool, quite thoughtful in a way. They're quite high key, they're a bit poppy. They're car seats, and they're actually legitimate car seats that they've used and they've reupholstered. And they've reupholstered them with images of gushing waterfalls. Now, if you think about Friedrich and the idea of the German sublime and that sense of, nature being larger and greater than mankind, it goes back to a sort of Goethe idea of the sublime as well, who's obviously later than Friedrich, but there's a big tradition, European tradition, of this insurmountable nature that we are sort of in awe of. So they've depicted these ideas of the gushing waterfall on the car seats in this sort of parody of form and function. Why the car seats? Why cars? Well, of course, in modernist art, architecture and design, chairs stand in for the person. They're something that we sit on, they have a functional quality, and yet they're aesthetically beautiful, to the point that now we collect chairs as beautiful objects and display them in homes as a form of decorative, real estate. So they've gone back to the car. It's the material, it's the object that we all aspire to, we all have. There's a rite of passage in Australia of getting your first car, and that gives you wheels and it gives you freedom. They're static in a gallery space, but it denotes freedom and movement. They started thinking about chairs, and chairs in the context of cars, when they were based in Mildura and driving a lot in the landscape. And they thought, here we are, sitting in this chair, it's a sculptural object, and we're moving through time and space. So it actually denotes this idea of time and space and passage. What better way than to do that than be surrounded by a sublime landscape? So you're sitting on it. I gather the chairs come from a Holden and a Chimera or something like that. So these are Australian cars. I regret to say that they may have been made in Geelong, but they're certainly not now. But there is an Australian vernacular to that, which I think is quite fun. They've located them and positioned them on 2 plinths. And the plinths are really important. Janet and Jennifer are really interested in this idea of modernism and modernist language, as I said. So that's where the idea of the chair, the absence of the body, all that sort of thing comes in. But they've used concrete bases and they're pressed concrete. So you can see the imprint of timber. this links back to brutalist architecture and this idea of, in a man-made material, concrete, that, you know, denotes going forward, the future, innovation, change. You've got this imprint of nature. To reinforce that, they've also imprinted the pattern of two introduced exotic species through the leaves that they've pressed in. They're perfectly formed leaves. If you, as a child, when you used to draw leaves, if you couldn't have done it more perfectly than they've done, and this isn't actually a real leaf. We've positioned the two chairs front on and side on, so that when you come into the gallery, you see this hole in the back of the column. Now, the column obviously also relates to the idea of sculpture always being put on a plinth or being put on a stand, being elevated in significance, usually a very significant man made in, you know, bronze or some valuable material. So there's a play of that, you know, an awareness of that too. And the whole, that puncture of this tradition is very much what they're about. It's called Falling Water, and as I said, you could read that as being the reference to the waterfall on the chairs, but it's also a homage to Frank Lloyd Wright, most famous of American architects, who was very influential in his thinking in Australia as well, worked with Walter Burley Griffin, who developed the blueprint for Canberra, so very influential in terms of our own understanding of place and history. And he made one of his most famous houses that was cantilevered over water, called Falling Water. So for any architecture groupies or lovers of modernist design, you hear the word Falling Water and you instantly get transported to America, to this particular house with its cantilevers over a waterfall of fresh water. And that's the story of these works.